Your sacrifice is often just a bribe for your disobedience. We've all been there. You're sitting in a church pew, or maybe you're just driving alone, and you feel that familiar weight of guilt. You know you've been cutting corners. You know you've been holding on to a grudge that's starting to rot your peace. You know that there's an area of your life where God said go left, and you've been driving right for the last 6 months. So what do? We do what humans have done for 5,000 years. We try to negotiate. We think, all right, God, I'm not ready to give up that habit. I'm definitely not ready to forgive that person. But I'll tell you what, I will start volunteering on Sundays. I will double my giving this month. I'll post 3 verses a day on my social media. We call it a sacrifice. We wrap it in religious language and present it like a gift. But if we're honest, it's a bribe. It's an attempt to pay God off with our stuff so that he won't ask for ourself. Today, we're diving into the altar of the heart, and we're going to look at why God, the creator of the universe, actually rejects most of the sacrifices people try to give him. We're going to see why the Bible relentlessly hammers home one uncomfortable truth: that to obey is better than sacrifice, because sacrifice is a transaction, but obedience is a relationship. To understand why God eventually started rejecting sacrifices, we first have to understand why he commanded them in the first place. If you open up the book of Leviticus, especially chapters 1 through 7, it reads like a technical manual. It's dense, it's bloody, and to our modern ears, it's really foreign. But if it wasn't just a list of chores, it was a language. Back then, the tabernacle was the only place where a holy God and a sinful people could coexist. Sacrifice was the bridge. There were 3 types of offerings. There was the burnt offering, and it wasn't just about killing an animal, it was about total devotion. The entire animal was consumed by fire, and it symbolized a person saying, everything I am belongs to you. Then you have the grain offering. The grain offering was a thank you note. It was the first fruits of the harvest. It acknowledged that God provided the food on the table. And then you have the peace offering. This one was the most beautiful. It was a communal meal. A portion went to God, a portion went to the priest, and the rest was eaten by the family that offered it. It was a fellowship meal, literally sitting down to dinner with the Creator. These rituals were designed to be physical expressions of an internal reality. The blood reminded them that the sin is lethal and it has a cost. The smoke rising reminded them that their prayers and lives should drift toward heaven. But here's the danger: humanity is excellent at keeping the ritual and losing the heart. We're experts at performing the dance while our hearts are miles away from the music. By the time we get to the kings and the prophets, the sacrificial system had become a get out of jail free card. People were living like the devil all week and then showing up at the temple on Friday with a lamb, thinking that the blood would wash away a heart that didn't want to change. The most explosive moment in this entire thing happens in 1 Samuel 15. It's the story of King Saul, and it's the ultimate warning for anyone who thinks they can outsmart God with their generosity. God gave a very, very specific surgical command to Saul: go execute judgment on the Amalekites. He was told to leave nothing behind: no riches, no kings, and specifically no livestock. It was a test of absolute, literal obedience. But Saul saw an opportunity. He looked at the prime sheep and the choice cattle and thought, what a waste to destroy all this wealth. So he spared the king and kept the best of the animals. When the prophet Samuel arrived, he heard the bleating of sheep in the background. And he asked Saul, what is this noise that I hear? And listen to Saul's excuse. It's similar to what we use today. He didn't say, I was greedy. He said, the people spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God. He tried to sanctify his rebellion. He tried to put a religious sticker on his disobedience. He thought God will be so happy with these expensive sacrifices that he'll overlook the fact that I ignored his direct orders. But Samuel's response changed everything. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. Think about that. Saul wanted to be the architect of his own worship. He wanted to give God what Saul felt like giving, but God doesn't want your plan B sacrifice when he already gave you a plan A command. This cost Saul his kingdom and honestly his mind. It proves that you cannot pay God off with his own currency. If you aren't obeying, your sacrifice isn't a gift, it's an insult. So as we move through the Old Testament, the tone gets even sharper. God starts to sound offended by the religious activity of his people. Through the prophet Amos, God said something terrifying. I hate, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Imagine that. They were doing exactly what the law prescribed. The festivals, the songs, the offerings. And God called it a stench. Why? Because while they were at the altar, they were also oppressing the poor. They were being dishonest in business and they were neglecting justice. And then you have Micah 6. The people are frustrated. They ask, what does God want? Thousands of rams? 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Should I give my firstborn child for my sin? They were willing to do something massive and painful and expensive, but they weren't willing to do the one thing that God actually asked for. Micah answers them, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Sacrifice is often the easy way out. It's easier to write a check than to be humble. It's easier to fast for a day than to act justly for a lifetime. It's easier to kill a lamb than to kill your pride. We love sacrifice because it has a start and an end time. We can check it off a list, but obedience is 24/7 surrender. It's a posture, not a performance. So this all builds to a crescendo in the New Testament. For centuries, the blood of bulls and goats acted as a temporary fix. Hebrews 10 tells us those sacrifices were just a shadow of the reality that was coming. They could never actually take away the sin. They could only point to the need for a Savior. Then Jesus walks onto the scene. Jesus didn't just come to do a sacrifice. He came to be the sacrifice. But notice how he did it. He didn't just stumble onto the cross. No, his death was the result of a lifetime of perfection, a lifetime of flawless obedience. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he prayed, not my will, but yours be done, that was the moment that the sacrifice was truly made. The cross was just the outward evidence of his inward yes to the Father. And because Jesus became the ultimate blood sacrifice, the system of Leviticus was retired. The veil was torn, the debt was paid in full. We no longer need to bring a lamb to an altar to find favor with God. But does that mean that the sacrifice part of our faith is gone? No, it just changed form. In Romans 12:1, Paul writes, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." Guys, a dead sacrifice is easy. You lay it down, it stays put, and it's over. But a living sacrifice has a problem. It keeps trying to crawl off the altar. To be a living sacrifice means that every morning when you wake up, you have to decide all over again to lay your will down. You have to decide that your hands and your feet, your eyes and your yes belong to him. You see, I was going to title this study, Why Obedience is Better. But we have to be honest about the tension that obedience will often lead you to a sacrifice. When God tells you to be honest at work, even if it costs you promotion, that's obedience. When God tells you to forgive someone who doesn't deserve it, and you have to lay down your right to avenge yourself, that's obedience leading to a sacrifice. The difference is the source. Religious sacrifice is something you choose to give God to get him off your back. But the living sacrifice is something God asks of you because he's leading you into life. Jesus wants us holy and blameless, but not through our own effort or our own religious hacks. He wants us to be holy by staying connected to him, the vine. All right, so think about the character of Abraham. He didn't go up to the mountain looking to kill his son. No, he went up to the mountain because he was obeying a voice. The sacrifice was simply the cost of his yes. And because he was willing to obey, God provided the ram. God always provides what is needed for the person who is willing to follow. So where does this leave you today? Maybe you've been trying to pay God off. Maybe you've been substituting activity for alignment. You've been busy at church, busy with your rituals, but your heart is cold. You're doing the sacrifices, but you're ignoring the simple things that God told you to do months ago. Guys, the era of the stone altar is over. The only altar that matters is the one inside your chest. You see, Jesus has already done the heavy lifting. He already provided the blood so that you could stand before God without shame. He isn't looking for your stuff. He isn't impressed by your theology. He's looking for your staying power. Stop trying to negotiate. Stop trying to find the religious shortcut to bypass the simple path of following him. Lay down your life, not as a dead ritual, but as a living, breathing response to his mercy. Because at the end of the day, a life surrendered in simple, quiet obedience is the only sacrifice God ever truly wanted. Choose to obey, not because you have to, but because he's worthy.